The Heart is a Monster by Joshua Chaplinsky. Emma paced the apartment, cell phone pressed against her ear. Megan played the digital angel on Emma's shoulder, countering her friend's devil's advocacy. "You're better off," Megan said. "He's a total jerk." "I don't know," Emma dragged out the long "oh" sound. "I might have overreacted." "Overreacted? He threw a rhododendron at you. He wasn't trying to hurt me. It was potted." Emma's hand instinctively went to her nose. She winced as she fingered the bandage. "Stop touching it," Megan said. "How do you know?" "Because I know you. Promise me you won't call him." Megan had shifted into full-on mother mode. "Oh, God," Emma thought. "What am I going to tell my mother?" To Megan, she said, "I won't call him." "Promise me," Emma huffed. "You're almost as overbearing as he is." She ran her hand along a half-empty shelf. She turned the books face out to make it seem more full. "I'm sorry," Megan said. "I know it's hard." Emma didn't respond. She walked around the apartment listening to Megan breathe. She found the rhythm soothing. Maybe she should ask Megan to come over, lie next to her until she fell asleep, like one of those people who needed the whirring of a fan or the wind tunnel drone of a hairdryer to relax. A girl she knew in junior high burned her house down that way. The doorbell interrupted her runaway train of thought. "Who's that?" Megan was instantly on alert. "Calm down, it's just the delivery guy." Emma doubled back across the apartment and went to undo the chain lock. "Check the peephole first." Emma paused, arm midway to the door. Megan liked to claim clairvoyance ran in her family, but in reality she just worried too much. Anticipate every possible outcome and you were bound to be right some of the time. Emma's lashes brushed the small glass lens as she indulged her friend. "Delivery!" A man in a stained apron brandished a bag of food like a search warrant. Emma found it unnerving how delivery guys always seemed to know when they were being looked at. She took in the man's disheveled appearance. The fisheye lens made everyone look suspicious. This guy either worked at a restaurant or made socks out of human flesh. There was only one way to find out. Megan listened in as Emma paid the man without getting murdered. Then, bag in one hand and phone in the other, Emma kicked the door closed and took the food to her kitchen. The chain swung like a pendulum, unconnected. "What'd you get?" Megan asked as Emma unpacked the bag. "Pancakes." Comfort food." Megan smacked her lips in an exaggerated manner. "The best part of breaking up." She sang the words to the old tune of an old coffee jingle. Emma paused mid-rummage. "Shit." "I'm sorry, too soon?" "Shit!" Emma stepped back from the bag. Megan's voice rose in pitch. "What's the matter?" "Bastard!" Emma put down the phone and strode back to the door, throwing it open to appear in the hallway. Finding nothing, she slammed it shut and returned to the kitchen. Her cell phone squawked from the counter. "Emma, tell me what's going on." Emma picked up the phone, tears brimming in her eyes. Her voice quivered. "They forgot the syrup." Megan exhaled hard. "Don't scare me like that." It came out harsher than she meant it to. "Sorry," Emma said, sniffling. "It's okay. You want me to bring you some?" "Nah, I'm not even hungry." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I only wanted pancakes because Jared used to get them for me." "Well," Megan dug deep for sage advice, "maybe it's time you switched to waffles." Emma rolled up her eyes, wiped at her smudged mascara. "I feel so stupid." "It'll get better, Em." "I thought I knew who he was." The words hung between them in cellular limbo. "You know what?" Emma finally said. "What?" "I think I need a bath." The flicker of candlelight cast a warm glow across the bathroom tile. The tub was small, but Emma was smaller, and her knees rose above the water like two pale islands. Soft music floated over from her laptop, which was rested on the top of the toilet seat. Jared had been the one who told her Sadie was a band, not the name of a solo artist. He also used to teach her incessantly for liking them. Emma wanted to finish listening to the song to spite him, but the wounds were still too fresh. Suds fell to the floor as she extended her arm and skipped to the next track. The lonely notes of a 50s-style guitar arpeggio filled the room. Legs kicked and the water splashed as Emma scrambled to slam the laptop closed before the haunting, high-pitched vocals came in. Just You from the Twin Peaks soundtrack had been their song, despite both of them finding it super cheesy. The irony that 3 people involved in a love triangle sung the song wasn't lost on her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling it provoked. The pulsing abscess beneath her sternum threatened to eclipse her anger. She hopped out of the tub and threw her robe over wet skin. Shallow puddles in the shape of feet followed her to the bedroom, where she snatched up her phone and scrolled through her recent contacts. 9 of them were from him. The most recent was Megan. Promise me you won't call him. Emma's thumb hovered. She bit her lip. A trickle of pain fed the hole in her chest. The androgynous falsetto of James Hurley played hide-and-seek in her head. She pressed her thumb to the phone like an ink pad, like she was being fingerprinted. A picture of Jared flipping the double bird filled the screen. Every moment between rings lasted an eternity. 1 ring. Hang up the phone, hang up the phone, hang up the phone. 2 rings. Hang up the phone, hang up the phone, hang up the phone. 3 rings. Hang up the phone, hang up the phone, hang up the fucking... A doorbell cut the mantra short. A moment of silence followed that lasted even longer than the rest. Hello? Emma's voice cracked as she called across the apartment. She pulled the phone from her ear to listen for a response. The phone continued to ring in her hand. 4 rings. 5. The bell sounded again. Emma thumbed end call and marched toward the door, the realization of what she'd done fueling her irritation. A little late for syrup, she said as she put her eye to the peephole. There was no one there. God damn it. She turned to walk away. Ding dong. Even before she put her eye back to the lens, she could tell that the hall was still empty. What the hell? The point of light constricted as she pulled away. She noticed the dangling chain. Shit. Her hand shook as she fumbled with the chain, finally slotting it into place. She locked the deadbolt and stepped away from the door. Hello? She twirled a lock of still wet hair around her finger and waited. Nothing. As soon as she turned to walk away, 3 jarring knocks broke the silence. Emma yelped and whirled, an involuntary spasm causing her to drop her phone. She stared at the door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. There were no follow-up knocks. She exhaled, not realizing she had been holding her breath. Her heart pounded as she inched back towards the door. No light shone through the peephole. She didn't want to get too close, but she had to be sure. She put her eye to the convex lens. A shroud of darkness obscured her view. Who's there? The words came out in one swift exhalation. The only response was the sound of her own breathing. It didn't provide the same comfort as Megan's had. Something felt off. It was out of sync with the rise and fall of Emma's chest. She held her breath, voluntarily this time, and the breathing continued. These weren't the short breaths of a frightened rabbit. They were slow and deliberate and filled with menace. Hello, Emma, a monotone voice said. She recognized it instantly. Jared? You shouldn't have hung up on me like that. Jared, this isn't funny. Take your hand off the peephole. No. Vulnerability entered the voice. I don't want you to see me like this. Concern diluted her fear. Why? What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine. I'm just ashamed. Why don't you come in and we can talk about it? The words just came out. She couldn't stop them. I don't think that's a good idea. At least let me see your face. The breathing got heavier. Jared? I can't show you his face. Emma's chest tightened. What do you mean, his face? The breathing morphed into a sinister laugh. You're not Jared, Emma said. The voice dropped an octave. I never claimed I was. Emma's hand covered her mouth. She spoke through trembling fingers. What do you want? Just to talk. You want to talk? Then show me your face. The voice grunted. Suit yourself. The shadow lifted and light poured into the lens. Emma pressed her eye to the peephole. She didn't see anyone. Hello? No answer. Emma slammed an open palm against the door. This isn't funny. Keeping an eye on the hallway, she turned the lock on the door slow so the tumblers wouldn't click and then paused. When nothing happened, she reached for the chain. Just as she touched it, the door bucked, pulling the chain taut, slamming into Emma's nose. Stars ignited in her periphery. The door swung back and forth as the person on the other side continued to force their weight against it. With each hit, the chain gave a little more. Emma screamed and charged the door, throwing her shoulder into it. She turned the lock and the tumblers clicked into place. She grabbed a chair and jammed it under the doorknob. No need for that, the voice sounded amused. You're safe as long as you don't unlock the door. Emma blinked back tears, grabbed her phone from the floor, and started to dial. I'm calling the cops. She forced the words out between shallow breaths. Go ahead, the voice said. All they'll find is a hysterical girl on the wrong end of a bad breakup. They'll patronize you with their teeth and leer at you with their eyes, and as the words come spilling out of your mouth, you'll start to realize how foolish you sound. You'll think maybe you blew the whole thing out of proportion. But it won't matter, because in the few seconds the door is open, I will have slipped in, and I'll be waiting for them to leave so we can be alone. Emma stopped dialing. The voice was right. The police wouldn't believe her. She hit backspace, the numbers 911 disappearing in reverse. Then she hit speed dial for Megan. It rang once and went straight to voicemail. Hey, this is Megan. Leave a message. Beep. Come on. Emma ended the call and redialed. The number you have reached is no longer in service. How is that possible? Emma yelled at the phone. It didn't provide an answer. She scanned the room for other options, as if one would present itself. She needed someone or something to tell her what to do, because as far as she could see, she only had one choice, and she'd resigned herself to that fact, even before she dialed Jared's number. Time stopped as her phone searched for a signal. He has to answer, she told herself. The amount of times he tried to call in the past few days, there was no way he wasn't waiting by the phone. Then again, now that she'd given in, it would be just like him to ignore her. A tin can trill informed her that her phone had finally connected to the network. A second later, another louder ring echoed on the other side of the door. She looked up, confused. The line rang a second time. Once again, the echo answered from the hallway. Her reflex realized what was happening before she did, and she threw the phone to the ground. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist. Jared's voice spoke to her from her cell phone and from behind the door. All I want to do is talk. Like I said, as long as you don't open the door, I won't be able to hurt you. Emma had to clear her throat in order to speak. What do you mean, won't be able to? What I mean is, if you open the door, I'll have no choice. There was a thunk as something tapped hard against the door. A thunk and then a scrape as that something dragged along the length of the wood. Emma leaned in to listen, following the sound as it migrated south. She got on her hands and knees, lowering her head until her hair brushed the floor, and that's when she noticed the shadow under the door. A jagged piece of glass slid towards her, stopping inches from her face. Eyes filled with terror reflected back at her. Emma screamed, backpedaling to put some distance between herself and the sharp implement. The thing outside the door cackled. "What do you want?" Emma yelled. "Why are you doing this?" The blast receded slow. The voice modulated back to its lower pitch. "You might ask as well why the sun scars or why the sky is black." The blast stabbed against the door, keeping time like a metronome. "Why does a child scream when its stomach is empty? Why do maggots sing when they eat the child's flesh?" Emma hugged her knees to her chest as the thunk, thunk of the blast continued. "Hello?" An elderly voice interrupted. "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped. Emma shot up like a bolt, knocked the chair away from the doorknob, and pressed her eye to the peephole. "Mrs. Wheeler, is that you?" Shadow covered the lens once more. "I heard someone knocking," Mrs. Wheeler said to whatever was out there. "Are you here about fixing the vacuum?" "Mrs. Wheeler, go back inside. Call the cops." The shadow moved away from the peephole lens. "Mrs. Wheeler!" Emma strained to see down the hall to her neighbor's door. "Mrs. Wheeler!" Emma grabbed her phone from the floor and dialed 911. She watched the hallway as the phone rang, and a motionless male operator answered on the third ring. 911, what's your emergency?" "Something's attacking my neighbor. I need the police." "All right, miss, calm down. No need to get hysterical. You have to send someone. This is happening right now." "I understand the situation seems scary," the operator said, "but I'm going to need to ask you a few questions to make sure this isn't a false alarm." "False alarm? A woman is being assaulted. What more do you need to know?" Emma could hear the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. "Well, there's a little matter of protocol." "Fuck your protocol!" Emma's outburst silenced the operator. The clacking of keys stopped. "I can see you're not in the mood to reason," he finally said. "Please hold for my supervisor." "No, wait!" But it was too late. The line clicked as the operator transferred the call. "I told you they wouldn't be much help," the voice growled into the phone. A large black mass slammed against the apartment door. "No!" The mass left a translucent smear of red on the peephole lens. The voice on the phone laughed as the mass slid to the ground. Emma ended the call. "Mrs. Wheeler, are you all right? Answer me." Mrs. Wheeler didn't respond. Something warm and wet touched Emma's bare foot. She had looked down to see a pool of black blood seeping under the door. She slammed her fist against the wall. "You bastard!" She ran to the bathroom and grabbed a towel, which she used to sop up the influx of blood. Ragged breath accompanied it. "Mrs. Wheeler," Emma said, "are you still there?" "Help me," a fragile voice said. Emma looked up at the lock, thought about the warning she had been given. "I can't do that." "Please." Her neighbor's voice grew softer. "There's someone out here." "I know, Mrs. Wheeler. I'm sorry." Mrs. Wheeler hacked out a cough. Emma squeezed her eyes shut. "Please." "I can't. He won't let me." The old woman continued to cough. Each spasm sounded worse as the breaths between them got shorter. Her head bumped against the door with each hack. Emma imagined her hunched over like a cat, choking on a hairball. "Emma!" The old woman's voice erupted from her throat. Emma stifled a sob. Mrs. Wheeler's coughing turned hoarse, the air in her lungs forcing its way out of her body. "Open the door, you cunt!" Emma flinched as the speaker threw its weight against the door. Whatever it was, it no longer sounded like Mrs. Wheeler. It was as if something evil had been gestating inside her and had finally escaped her body, leaving a loose pile of human skin on the floor. Emma cried to herself as the beast thrashed uncontrollably. The violence seemed to go on forever. "I'm sorry," Emma said again, this time to herself. She waited for the Wheeler thing to tire itself out. Eventually, it emitted a final, drawn-out gasp and fell silent. Emma pressed her forehead against the door, tears falling to the blood-soaked towel. She picked up an unstained corner and dabbed her eyes. There was a violent tug, accompanied by the sound of tearing fabric. Emma cried out as several of her fingernails snapped to the cuticle. The towel ripped free of her hand and disappeared under the door. It left sheared bits of cotton in its wake, crimson spores floating in the air. Even lubricated by the blood, it shouldn't have been possible. The gap was too small. All the blood squeezed out of the towel and rushed towards her, soaking into her robe. Her fingernails rode the swell like leaves on a pond. Emma jumped up to escape the blood. Her legs went out from under her, and she came down on her tailbone hard. Red splashed in every direction. A jolt of electricity shot up her spine. As she lay there waiting for the pain to subside, a rancid smell permeated the apartment. It burned her eyes as it infiltrated her sinuses. She could hear something thick and wet moving around in the hallway. Was it the Wheeler thing? A filament of smoke reached under the door, followed by another. Soon there were dozens. They wrapped around Emma's ankle, slithering up her leg. She lashed out with her feet, snapping the hair-like tendrils, and crawled away from the door. The strands around her ankle dissipated when separated from their host. They left raised red lines on her skin. "Let me in." The voice spoke directly into her mind, each syllable pulsing with the pressure of a migraine. "Fuck you." Emma grabbed her head in her hands. The tendrils turned in her direction as if responding to her voice. "If I don't open the door, you can't hurt me." Is that what I said? You always did have a taste for lies. Maggots crawled out from under the door, smearing a trail through the thickening blood. You swallow them whole and beg for more. The tiny, insignificant white ones, the big, fat, juicy ones, and everything in between. The pus-colored larvae reddened and expanded as they gorged on the blood. Before long, they resembled a collection of severed toes, swollen with infection. The tendrils picked up an especially plump maggot and whipped it at Emma. It burst on impact like a squib, leaving a gunshot splash of red on her white robe. Emma recoiled in disgust. "Stop it!" A tendril lobbed another maggot. It exploded against Emma's head. She ran her fingers through her hair to comb it out, the deflated skin sticking to the blood on her hand. Gagging, she flailed wildly to shake it off. The maggots kept coming. A tendril lobbed a small one that had yet to feed. It landed on the bridge of Emma's nose and fell behind the bandage. She could feel it wriggling against her skin. Emma shrieked as she ripped the gauze from her face, her cries a mixture of pain and horror. She tensed every muscle in her body as she crushed the bandage in her hand. The voice inside her head bellowed with laughter. "Shut up, shut up, shut up!" Emma screamed. The pain had dulled her fear. She uncurled her fingers. A rolled-up pill of white smeared the center of the bandage. The smear didn't seem so gross or scary. The thing threw another maggot. And another. Emma stopped flinching. She thought back to that night when the flower pot had crushed her nose. How angry she'd been. Why Jared had left. Retreated, really. It was the pain that did it. Emma scooped up a handful of meaty grubs. She curled her fingers into a fist, squishing them. "I think you're starting to enjoy this." Emma ignored the voice. She stared at the pink ooze leaking from between her fingers. Then, before she had time to change her mind, she pulled back her hand and punched herself square in the face. The pain shot through her entire nervous system, top to bottom. It coursed through her veins and tore from her throat in the form of a caterwaul. She leapt up and grabbed the discarded chair, raising it above her head. She stood like that for a moment, a vengeful angel, blood pouring out of her nose. And then she was slamming the chair into the blood and the maggots and the tendrils over and over again. The pain fueled her rage, eradicating any meekness she had left. She cared about one thing, and one thing only: destruction of the enemy. Blood and pus coated everything when she paused to catch her breath. Snapped tendrils wrapped wilting around bits of chair, dissolving into nothingness. Silence settled over the apartment. Emma experienced a moment of peace. It didn't last long. The walls of the apartment began to hum. Emma cast a frightened glance around the room. The hum grew into a tremor, the tremor into a roar, inside her head and out in the world. It was the voice of Jared and Mrs. Wheeler. It was her own caterwaul. It was the thing outside the door. Paint cracked and dust fell. The lights flickered. Books toppled off their shelves. Fresh tendrils shot into the apartment, wrapping themselves around the remnants of the chair. They ripped the wood from Emma's hands and brought it crashing to the floor. Then they went to work, pulling with inhuman strength until the pieces somehow disappeared beneath the door like they were being fed into a wood chipper. It all took place in a matter of seconds. Emma fell to her knees and crawled to the nearest doorway for shelter. The tendrils seemed to have lost track of her, or at least reached their limit. They blindly probed the goop on the floor. Emma wrapped her robe around herself and waited for the shaking to stop. Cabinets opened and glasses fell, shattering around her. The roar reached what had to be its crescendo and then kept rising. It vibrated every atom in her body. Finally, when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, that her body had turned inside out, the electricity cut out, and everything ceased. Emma sat there in the dark, ears ringing. She couldn't even hear her own breathing. She sucked in a gulp of air and held it. Nothing. If that thing was still out there, she couldn't tell. Had she witnessed its death rattle? She floated in and out of consciousness, a dreamless sleep as empty as the dark around her. She couldn't tell the difference between the two. She didn't know how long this went on, but eventually she became aware of whispers in the dark. Someone was talking to her. "Who's there?" she said into the void. "Just you and I," a little voice inside her head said. "Together forever, like the song says." Emma groaned. "Please, just leave me alone." "You hate to be alone," the voice told her. It was a female voice, her own. "Loneliness is what got us into this mess." "Us," it said. "That's not true." "We knew he wasn't right for us." "I thought I could make it work." "What about the pregnancy?" "That's not fair. We made. Emma softened her voice. "I made the right choice. The whole situation could have been avoided. But I know what you're going to say. The heart wants what the heart wants, right? Well, believe me when I tell you, the heart is a fucking monster." As if on cue, the lub-dub of blood and veins overtook the ringing in her ears. The apartment door glowed translucent like flesh, pulsing in time to the percussive rhythm. It rose and fell with every breath Emma took, insistent, comforting. Her eyelids grew heavy as the rhythm lulled her back to sleep. Emma's eyelids fluttered open. She lay curled up in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, wearing nothing but her robe. It felt like a world-class hangover had taken up residence inside her head. Had she been drinking? The last thing she remembered was breaking up with Jared, but that couldn't be right. Her eyes traveled the length of the floor to a brick of metal and glass. It took her mind a minute to make sense of the shape. It was her cell phone. She bolted upright, scanning the apartment. Everything looked normal. No probing tendrils or insects writhing in blood. She brought up a hand to her face. Tenderness greeted her as she touched gauze. She stood up on Fawn's legs and wobbled toward the door, leaning against it as she picked up her phone. Light filtered through the lens of the peephole. She had to work up the nerve to put her eye to it. "Hello?" Her voice was as weak as her legs. She cleared her throat and tried again. Hello? No answer. A metallic click echoed down the hall as she unlocked the door. She pulled the door open, let the chain go taut. She peered into the hall. No Mrs. Wheeler. No blood. She shut the door and unhooked the chain, pulling the door back open before she had time to change her mind. The world didn't end when she stepped into the hallway. There were no surprises, no demonic voices of boyfriends past. A lock turned and keys jingled. Emma turned to see Mrs. Wheeler stepping out of her apartment. The elderly woman smiled wide when she saw Emma. "Emma, dear." "Mrs. Wheeler?" Emma's knees buckled beneath her. "You look tired. Did you sleep okay?" Emma grabbed a handful of hair and scratched her scalp. Not really. No." "Poor dear." Mrs. Wheeler pursed her lips. "Can I get you anything from the store?" "That's all right," Emma said, "but thank you." The old woman didn't press the issue. "I'm off then. See you later." "Bye." She watched as Mrs. Wheeler disappeared down the stairs. Emma stood there, swaying like a tree in the breeze, her mind a blank. She could almost feel the wind in her hair, sunlight warming her face. When she looked down, she half expected to see grass between her toes. An obnoxious ringtone interrupted the peaceful moment. She pulled the phone from her robe pocket. A picture of Jared flipping the double bird stared back at her. Her muscles tensed and her heart pounded. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. She looked down the hall, half expecting to see some monstrous aberration waiting to finish her off. A giant black heart, crowned in thorns, crying tears of blood, its tendrils reaching to embrace her, but there was nothing there. The ringing of the phone continued, demanding to be answered. Emma bit her lip. She felt a familiar trickle of pain. All she had to do was ignore the call, and he'd be out of her life forever. Simple as that. It didn't require any action on her part. Her thumb hovered above the screen, halfway between decline and accept. The opposable digit felt like it was made of lead. Emma's thoughts turned to pancakes. Pancakes and James Hurley's terrible singing. Was that all there was to their relationship? What about flowers? He'd gotten them for her once. Rhododendrons. They were lovely until he smashed them in her face. She thought about how much that hurt, but it wasn't enough to make her hit decline. It was still only a trickle. She thought about sitting in the emergency room alone, waiting for Megan to get off work, wondering where Jared had gone and why he wasn't there with her. Why she wasn't surprised. She thought about punching herself in the face again. Had she really done that? Is that what it would take to turn the trickle into a torrent? Another adrenaline jolt of pain? A bigger dose every time until no amount would be enough? Emma's thumb came down. She looked where it had landed. It was on the decline button. She put the phone back in her pocket and walked into the apartment. The door swung slowly behind her, stopping just inches from the strike plate. It swayed back and forth, lacking the momentum to shut itself. The sounds of Emma preparing breakfast could be heard from the hallway. If a neighbor had happened by, they would have been treated to the sunniest rendition of Sweetest Taboo ever hummed. And if they stood there long enough, eavesdropping on this private little moment of triumph, they might have seen a group of inky tendrils reach out from inside the apartment and pull the door closed.
Joshua Chaplinsky is the managing editor of LitReactor.com. He has also written for the popular Chuck Palahniuk. He is the author of Kanye West Reanimator. His short fiction has appeared in Zetetic, Motherboard, Volume 1 Brooklyn, Thuglit, Dark Moon Digest, Pantheon Magazine, Fabula Argentea, and multiple print anthologies. You can find more information at joshuachaplinsky.com. The music in this episode is by Sealand. You can find more of their work, including their album Dark Days, at sealand.bandcamp.com.